Joined now on 310 to Left by Red Sox Assistant General Manager Paul Toboni for a conversation about breakout prospect Kristian Campbell. Paul, you haven't seen Kristian Campbell yet in person this season?
No, I haven't. I saw him in spring training. Obviously, I was around him every day, but yeah, just how it's worked out with my schedule and his promotion, I've missed him, but I'm sure I'll be seeing him here shortly. So
You
I've
said
watched
you,
I think I told you. Yeah, I've watched a probably a sickening amount of video to this point, but I haven't seen him live. So
as someone who got my first in-game glimpse of Kristian recently this season, it was compelling. But I'm sure that you're well aware of what he's been doing, as you point out, a lot of videos. So, how would you describe what Kristian Campbell has done this year in Greenville and now in Portland in his first full season of professional baseball?
yeah, it's really exciting. I think a number of things he showed us as an amateur. He's continued to develop and stay strong in terms of his contact skills and his ability to control the zone. And then he's come on to this great power potential, and I think he's made some improvements to his path too. So it's all been a really exciting few months for Kristian, and what's really fun about it is I think he's still scratching the surface. So it's been fun.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the fascinating part of him, right? Because like the way that he's approaching hitting, and we'll hear from him in a bit, is different than how he did in college. Like he was a leadoff hitter. He wanted to be a prototypical leadoff hitter while he was at Georgia Tech, and now all of a sudden you're dropping him into the cleanup slot in Portland, and he's kind of recognizing that, oh, my skill set is a bit expands a bit beyond what I was doing in college. So as he taps into this interesting power potential, I'm curious, like, how much is this the player that you thought you might be getting in the fourth round last year? What was the scouting process like with him as you were trying to figure out the player that he was, which was a very good player at Georgia Tech when he was approaching it as a line drive hitter, compared to the way that he's playing now?
Yeah. So just to back up, I referenced it, but I think he did. He had three things really going for him, right? Like he made tremendous contact when he was at Georgia Tech. He didn't chase much. He had great plate discipline, and then also he has this excellent frame, right? He's probably 6'3". At the time at Georgia Tech, he was probably somewhere between 190 or 195 pounds. So those things he had going for him, right? On the flip side, right, there were a few things that we thought were untapped, and first and foremost, for how big and athletic he was and is, we thought he could move the bat faster, right? So I think part of that was probably intent based. You hit on it. I think he was probably optimizing for contact as opposed to kind of what contributes to value offensively. And then his setup, like I think you can see video, or Kristian can walk you through it as well. He had this deep crouch, which might have inhibited his movements a little bit. And then also, I think there was some things to clean up in terms of how he sequenced. So that was a big thing, right, to get him to move the bat faster. And then two, like his ball flight as well. He'll speak to this, but he was on the ground at a really high rate in college. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I would guess he was probably north of 60%, which is really, really high. So right from the get-go, we knew that there were two primary things that we wanted to tap into. We wanted to tap into this awesome athletic frame that he had and get him moving the bat faster, but then also turn some of those ground balls into more line drives and fly balls. And didn't really come out his first year in pro ball, but then he spent the whole offseason with us in Fort Myers, and it started to really show up this year, which is exciting.
To me, that gets to such an interesting question because you're scouting not just for the player as they are, but instead what they can be. And so that entails the relationship between scouting and player development. And I should add that before you were assistant GM, you first were a Red Sox director of amateur scouting, and then in 2023, when you guys drafted Campbell, you were a VP of both amateur scouting and of player development. But it's super interesting to think about how organizations integrate those two things, right? Because they're not necessarily the same. Like what you see is, well, they are related, but not the same. what you see is one question, and then what someone can become is another. So how do you go about that process of identifying untapped upside and then realizing it? Like how are player development in amateur scouting integrated so that you can do the best possible job of taking guys where you see this potential and actually unlock it?
So it's a great question, and honestly, I think like it's an ongoing task for us to continue to improve in this area. But I think first and foremost, from a player development standpoint, you have to have a really good understanding of where you can influence positive change, or where you have demonstrated you can improve players, right? And so, without going into the details, like just in theory, right? Like what we want to do is we want to select on attributes that we're going to have a really, really tough time developing, right? And then where we can develop, like if they are deficient in those areas, that's okay, right? And then along the spectrum of super risky to safe bets in terms of where we can develop, we basically just have to find ways to adjust players' ranking on the board, right, to reflect that, and then the one thing we can't control is when these players are going to be available for us, right? So we try and get them in the best spot. I should add too, like with the evaluation of some of our player development folks as well, and then do our best to just get them in the right order in the draft, and then hopefully we can select a high number of players that are that carry the innate attributes that we want, but also have runway or potential to develop the traits that we think are developable, so to speak.
So what are those? Like what are the most developable traits? That's really fun to say, actually, whether or not it's a word or not. And what are the ones that you really think that's an innate one that is a much harder one to develop?
Yeah, I don't think it's something that like we just say like, okay, for instance, like power we can develop, and contact we can't develop. Like I think it's all unique to the player, right? But I think there are probably some overarching things that I think like make intuitive sense, right? So like physical projection is one, right? If we take a player that is completely maxed out from a physicality standpoint, it's tough to believe, right, that they're going to be able to gain more strength that hopefully manifests in more velocity or bat speed or whatever it might be. So that's an obvious one. But then, a lot of the other traits, it's unique to the player and how the player does it. And so it's really, we try and look at each player on an individual basis, and then gauge kind of where they can develop their traits most based on how they move and how their body works and all those things.
That's an interesting one with Kristian, right? Because how the body moves, like it's an unusual swing. I've heard different people like kind of say it's a little bit of a difficult one to establish an obvious framework, right? Like there's a toe tap there. Like sometimes the upper body is moving like at a different it's not a seamless integration of upper body and lower body, but he hits the ball so hard. So how difficult is that from a scouting standpoint to make sense of a guy who doesn't have a typical swing, but yet to say like that can be a really good and impactful swing nonetheless?
Yeah, so the first question I would ask is like, are we working backwards from the outcomes on the field, right? So like if we say like, gosh, this swing, to me, like I have this bias, let's say that, oh, it's not all that aesthetically pleasing. Like, okay, like how is that manifesting in his on-field play, right? If we say like, okay, this guy's gonna have a tough time making contact, but then we look into it and he's made great contact against some really, really good pitchers, like, is that us just not loving how something might look aesthetically, or is there some actual underlying traits as part of his swing that will inhibit his progress when he reaches a certain threshold of competition, right? So those are the questions we ask, and I think like one of the other things too that I think ties this all together for Kristian is the type of kid he is and how focused and motivated he is by improving, and then also like he's got great aptitude, and so he doesn't just understand the what behind what we're trying to get him to do, he understands the why. And I mentioned because even if he is deficient in some of those areas and we want him to clean up, something in his swing, right, he'll get it, and the buy-in is really high. And I think you'll learn that when you speak to him. And like I said, that's what ties everything together in Kristian's case, but in prospects cases across the board.
So I have to ask. It's safe to say that you've been at least somewhat surprised by this level of performance for a kid who you took out of the fourth round through a half season. His numbers across the board rank up there with basically anyone in minor league baseball.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we are pleasantly surprised. I think if not just us, but I think if most teams knew that this was going to be the performance, a year out from the draft, he led the Sally League in offense, and he's leading the Eastern League in offense now, right? He's likely going much better than the fourth round, right? And that is a huge testament to first and foremost, Kristian and his desire to improve and his ability to improve and desire to put the work in, but then also our staff and how good of a job they've done just laying out the plan for Kristian and current, assessing his current state and laying out with great clarity what he could be, and then creating the roadmap to get him there. That's the name of the game, and that happened really early on when we selected him, and I think we're just starting to see the dividends that it's paying, and all the support and hours that our staff has put in, and Kristian, obviously.
I'll wrap up with this then. Like, this has been rapid progress, right? Like, he is remaking his swing. He's altering the intent of what he's doing at the plate, and becoming a different caliber of prospect than he was at the time that you drafted him a year ago. Given how rapidly this is happening, what does that mean about what the future could look like for Kristian Campbell? How excited are you about kind of thinking about what the upside can look like for a player who's, one, performing exceptionally well through his first half season of minor league baseball, and two, who has shown this kind of very interesting growth potential?
Yeah, so as I said, right, like beyond excited about how he's performed to date. Now, having said that, what I'm more excited by is kind of what the future is going to look like for Kristian, just because, like, I really believe that he's just scratching the surface. I think there's this thought that, like, gosh, he's hitting the ball so hard right now. It's amazing that he's gotten there, like, and now he's there, and that's not the case with Kristian in my mind. He still has the potential to hit the ball a lot harder. He can improve his ball flight. He can improve his swing decisions, no matter how good they are, and his contact ability too. And then, you know what? Like, we haven't even talked about him defensively, but he's made tremendous strides defensively. He's made himself into an extremely versatile defender that will be able to provide value at a lot of different spots around the field. And I don't think he's close to done there either. So, and then the physical projection too. Like, he put on 15 pounds this offseason, somehow did so while decreasing his body fat too. And I think there's still room there as well. And with how committed he is, with how great of a kid he is, with how coachable he is, with how focused he is, those are the reasons I think why not just me, but our whole player development and baseball operations group are so excited for Kristian's future.
Well, it's a pretty wild concept to think that a guy who is hitting the ball this hard, and there have been a lot of like 112, 113, 114 mile an hour home runs this year, if you're right that there's a lot more in the tank there, then this could be an awfully interesting ride. But Paul, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it. It's been great having you on the podcast.